Yeah, that's true. And what I have to say is what the psychotherapist warned us about. He said this is a very long process. Just because we think we might have found something that is behind his problem doesn't mean that we can immediately make friends with them. It doesn't mean that we can immediately persuade the host, our son, to manage them in some way. It's a very slow, step-by-step, trust-building approach. And just last week at the session that we had last week, he turned to as he was debriefing us, we returned to the session, and the last 5 minutes he briefs us. And Mark, by the way, loves these sessions. He absolutely loves them. He's relaxed and he's comfortable and he smiles and he laughs. And this man is a very good man for this. Tony here will vouch for that. Yeah. He's a very relaxed individual. No ego, no side to him, is there? No. And in fact, that's a key to this. Never ever put a person with an ego in front of someone like Mark.
Very interesting point, yes.
Never ever do that. And Mark can feel that openness from him, that there's no side or no purpose, that's ulterior motive. He can feel that from this person. You can see it. There's a relaxed nature. And he behaves, by the way, I'm digressing, but he behaves in a way with Tony that he never behaves in any other way with anyone else, except occasionally with us at our most relaxed selves. He behaves in a mature, can I say still way? So we'd arrive and he would sit in the chair and we'd be gabbing a bit, and we've still got our bits of egos in there, haven't we? And Mark would turn to us and just say, you going yet? And you don't know him, so you wouldn't understand how socially mature that could be, how streetwise that could be. He isn't streetwise at all. He's socially completely immature socially. And he just turned and looked at us and said, are you going now? And we look at him, we smile, and we look at Tony, and then Mark would turn to Tony and say, here's my cup, let's have some tea. And of course he gets his own cup out the bag because that's his autism coming through. And we leave. But this particular time, last week, as we were getting the briefing, he turns to Mark and says, we've been talking quite a lot, Mark, haven't we, over the last hour? Do you want to tell your mum and dad about what we've been saying? And he says, not really. I said, well, what we were talking about was about the Spanish man, and you were telling me a bit more about him, weren't you? And do you want to tell your mum and dad about that? And he said, not now. And he said, you sure? He says, no, you've had enough now, Tony. And then laughed. And Tony turns to us and says, that's what I mean. His characters inside are beginning to tell us things, but they're still afraid to tell us too much.
This is interesting, this, Ed, because Ed and I were discussing this 2 weeks ago. We have something called the Walker Group, which is a group of people who are interested in my writing, and we meet up in Liverpool and spend 2 hours just talking like this, which is always quite fascinating. But one of the areas in my first book I deal with is about dissociative personality syndrome. And there have been 1 or 2 classical cases of this. And I'm reminded when Ed describes these circumstances of a particular case that was reported either as The Many Faces of Eve or Sybil, and I can never remember which one it was. But this was made into a movie in the mid-60s. But effectively, if you read the original books on this, you will find that exactly what Ed is describing about his son actually happened in one of these most famous cases.
Exactly.
And if
and that's what, that's what's been on my mind ever since he's been talking. That was the 3 faces of Eve.
Yeah, and do you remember the circumstances where they said that they all lived in this room and there was a spotlight in the middle of the room, and then one of the personalities would get up and stand in the spotlight and effectively take over the body of Sybil or Eve, and in which case then they'd move away from the spotlight and somebody else would take control. Now, there was another case in 1973 called the Campus Rapist, which was a guy called Billy Milligan in I think it was in San Francisco, and Milligan had a similar issue. But what is fascinating with Milligan is when they captured him, he said that he wasn't responsible for the rapes, and there was a character in his head called Ragan. And the interesting thing is that Ragan spoke in fluent Serbo-Croatian, even though Billy Milligan didn't speak a word of Croatian. And they managed to get away this personality because within Milligan's mind there was another character called the teacher. And what they managed to do is develop the teacher, who is the main controller of everything. And by then coalescing all the personalities into one major personality, they're then in a position you just have the two personalities, and then you then coalesce the two personalities into one. Or indeed, as there was a very famous case called the Christine Beecham case way back in the 1890s, where in fact what happened was that the character that eventually survived was not the original personality at all, but one of the subsidiary personalities, which effectively means that we all are not one personality. And I can only speak for myself, but I know sometimes there's this me that gets very frustrated and annoyed about things. There is me that's Anthony Peake, the writer, which is completely different from Tony Peake, the private person. And we all have these personalities. But I think with Ed's son and people who have particular neurological constraints in their mind, these personalities become real. And they believe they're real. So when these beings think you're trying to kill them, they really believe, and you are killing them. You are destroying an entity.
As Tony Corley said to me, it's like chopping off a limb. You cannot remove them. You have to coalesce them. You have to bring them together. You have to allow or coach the host into leading them. One of the metaphors, if you like, for how you might think about this is there's an old story about how a circus had an elephant from a very very early age in the circus act, and this small elephant, they used to, between acts, it would be have its leg chained to a stump it was just a tent stump, and they would just hammer it into the ground, and this small elephant couldn't pull away. And as it grew older, it would still be the same stump and the same chain, and as the elephant grew to be a completely full-grown elephant, it was still the same small stump and the same small chain that was holding it to the ground. And it was tested one time, rather tragically, when there was a fire, and the elephant would not run away. It could not pull away from what was in the ground, because its belief was so strong that it could not move that stump. Okay? To the point where it perished as a consequence of its belief. To change the belief of the elephant would have taken a lot of effort, okay, about that stump and that chain. To change the belief that my son has, that he is a subject of these people, that they control him, would be an enormous challenge. And so he believes that although some of these characters are clearly from his teenage years, he's now much bigger than that. He's moved on since then. But in his mind, in his memory, they still control him. They are there. So to change his belief to being one of, I don't need to be controlled, I can work with them and help them in their problems and so on. To change that is a really hard struggle. And when we talk to him about the possibility that he is stronger than them now, and that he can help them now, and he doesn't always have to do what they say now, he smiles, because it gives him a belief or a hope, a strand of hope, that maybe he can do something. He quickly changes, because again, they step in then. So we've got to be really careful what we say. We mustn't threaten them, because they step in. And my goal, and I think Tony's goal, his mum's goal, is to bring them all together, to make them work as a strong team. How strong would we all be if we had the assertive guy, and the one who was sensitive, and the supporter, and all these different personalities helping us through our life, helping us to make our decisions, all as one.
Yes.
How great would that be? We must not, though, let the personality that we know our son is become subsumed to any one of these.
Because you don't want to lose.
We don't want to lose the
this.
purity of who he is.
Yes.
And I think we're getting there. And I think that what we're learning may inform some of the cases around the world where perhaps they're struggling to find out what's the matter, or perhaps they're using an exorcist type approach, a hypnosis type approach to remove things, to get in there and actually attack these characters in this inner world that may be dangerous. And so, at least this may inform some of those people that there's another way of looking at it as well. Before they take any particular approach, there may be another way to do this. And okay, we haven't quite succeeded yet. I'm not sure what success will be when it's measured. I think we're here for the next 5 or 10 years, changing Mark's life. Actually, he's doing all the work.
Yes.
We're just facilitating the work.
Because we are hoping, Ed and I will be visiting, hopefully soon, a retired professor of psychiatry over in Leeds. I've just managed to get another book deal, and I'll be writing a book on near-death experience with 2 consultant psychiatrists, Australian consultant psychiatrists. And one of them has put me in contact with a retired professor, Alec Jenner, who was professor of psychiatry at the University of Leeds, and he's an expert in schizophrenia. And ironically enough, a few months ago I spoke to Alec Jenner on the phone, and I asked him, and I said, you have spent your whole career analysing and writing papers about schizophrenia and what it is, so can you explain to me what it is? And this guy who'd spent 40 years studying the subject turned round to me and he said, we haven't got a clue. And this is because we're looking at these things in the wrong way. And I think Ed's comment there was an extremely wise one. The idea that, we don't exercise these things. We need to understand exactly what is going on. What is human personality? What is consciousness? How does consciousness come about? And how on earth can Ed's son know things that he can possibly know through his senses? These things are known facts. The issue is how we deal with them. Eugen Bleuler was the guy that invented the term schizophrenia. And in one of my books I mentioned something which was a throwaway comment that he made in one of his books, where he turns around and he said, schizophrenics live in the future by about 5 to 10 seconds. And he cited cases of individuals who were permanently in the future. They were ahead of us all. And there was one guy that was talking to him one day, and he said, oh, he's walking down the corridor now. And as he said this, they heard somebody walk down the corridor. And then the guy turned around and he said, oh dear, he's dropped the bucket. And then 5 seconds later, they heard the bucket get dropped. And then, oh, he's going to come in my room now. And then 5 seconds later, the door opened. The only other time I know this effect takes place is when people are dying. There have been many, many cases of individuals, just as they're about to die, start to fall out of time in exactly the same way. Clearly there is something of profound importance happening here, and scientists and people who are stuck within the present paradigm of science need to start realising that they're trapped in their worldview. They've got all the evidence that there is something here of great fascination and great importance, and people like Ed's son are the people that are the people who are observing, who are at the front line, people like Ed, knowing how these things are happening.
When we came over here today in the car, we talked about a couple of things which we probably should touch upon.
Yes.
Today. One of them was the chemistry that I've read a bit more about and understand maybe a little more about, and I've observed certainly, and we've been able to experiment's a strong word, but test certain chemistry theories with Mark by way of carefully trying to help him. So there's the chemistry thing we should touch on. I think I should also in some way allude to the support that we've had from the health service and how diverse that can be at times, and where we are with that, because that's a bit on the back of the psychiatrist saying to you, we don't know what it is. I think we should touch on those things, And thirdly, I think I'd like to talk a little bit about some experiences we've had, certainly in the last few months, where I think I mentioned earlier the belief and faith that we have in things, that there's something bigger than all of us that perhaps we can look to help us at times of difficulty, and how some of that faith appears to be paying off. But overall, I think, faith, chemistry, whatever these things are, for us, it's the combination of all of those things that are helping us to be where we are in a position of optimism today compared to 5 years ago in the depths of despair and fearing our lives, for our lives and our well-being and that of our two girls at home, and even of our property, and the fear of even going out in the street because he could at any moment attack a passerby. And that medication was making him worse, and he was still having seizures, and the change in the seizure medication, even the slightest amount, would set him off on a 3-week period of uncertain, unpredictable, terrible behaviour. So the slightest change in medication in itself created these massive mood swings and behavioural issues that were intolerable, and that confounded the medical people, because they wanted, on one hand, to increase his medication, but we were giving them evidence that said the slightest change is giving us 3 weeks of grief at home, and there was nobody anywhere in the system that was able to deal with a client like our son, because he wasn't just schizophrenic, he was also severely autistic and also had epilepsy thrown in, and there's no single place that we can find that has the capability and resource to deal with that. And we never touched on the food thing that we've done, the major food changes we've done in his life to take out all glutamate things where we can. There's no regime in any institution that understands that, let alone could implement it and manage it and sustain it reliably. Give Mark some sugar, even in the herbal tea that we give him, would set him off within 5 minutes, and they would then feed him with antipsychotics and some of the biggest tranquilizing tablets you can imagine, and that in itself would set him off. And then he would never come back. He would never come back from that, because that's a downward spiral. Once you're in an institution, you see what I'm saying?
Ed, if I can interject here for just a moment. I have a question regarding the nutrition and the gluten-free or glutamate-free diet, and you mentioned that you'd had some success with that.
Massive success.
I would like to interject that there is a website that is entitled glutenfreeliving.com, and I'll send you an email regarding it, or put it in the form, and they have recipes for tasty treats and whatnot that are sugar-free, gluten-free, and even dairy-free. So, it might be worth looking into for you.
I don't think I've seen that particular website, but as you appreciate, there are probably many websites around the world that recognize that there's some intolerances that haven't been explained in the mainstream. Let me say this. I have a resource at my disposal, which is a 500,000 character journal that I've kept on my son for the last 5 years. And
wow.
This journal is a bit like a diary, but it's also a bit like a commentary as well. And it includes appendices which pull from sites such as the one you're naming, where we found it could be family maintained sites where families have got together to do these things, or it could be medical related sites where they talked about how the neurology of glutamate works and so on and so forth. And I've enclosed all these things in this journal that I have, and one day I will publish that gradually on the internet.
Yes, very important.
What I would say to people who say, there are tasty treats and things like that, we started off by looking at gluten-free, but then we found that gluten-free doesn't mean MSG-free.
Correct.
Okay? Gluten-free was designed for celiacs. So physiological problem in the gut, as it were, mainly. And so celiacs would complain it's down there where the problem is, and then they get these side effects and reactions. And I'm sure they will tell me more if I was to ask them the question. But generally speaking, it's an intestinal bowel type problem, a digestive system problem. And if they stay away from gluten, which is mainly in things like wheat, rye, oats, barley, those things that cause problems, they are by and large they're okay. But then you will get people say, but there are some things that we also can't tolerate as a celiac. And then you start to get into the realms of, I'm not sure they're talking about just celiac disorder here. I think they're talking about something which is bordering on an excess free glutamate problem. So I started to research glutamate and the MSG connection, because we knew MSG was a problem for Mark from a very early age. From, as I was saying earlier, before he was 2, we discovered this MSG thing. And no one believed us, and the medical people, they don't want to talk about MSG. You know, MSG is a powerful lobby in the world, isn't it? Everything you want to touch that tastes anything, you know, a very powerful lobby. And it was since then, by the way, in recent years, we found that the aspartame thing was equally poisonous to Mark because of the glutamate issue to do with aspartame as well, and the carcinogenic effect. But to me, carcinogenic, you know, so what for Mark? That isn't his problem. His problem is the way his brain chemistry suddenly blows up because of some introduction of something that no one can explain. So the glutamate thing, the glutamate diet, free diet, is a fascinating one. We found by starting with, take MSG out, okay, that's not the gluten thing. We took MSG out first. We then started to think, let's take gluten out. So we took all those things out, and we started to look at what you can eat, and looked at the websites, and we looked at what was in the aisles in the supermarkets that were gluten-free, and we started to give them those things. And, you know, 18 months ago, we thought, great, gluten-free pizzas. He likes pizzas, so gluten-free pizzas. And then we found that he was overdosing on pizzas, right? And he was becoming psychotic, seriously. And so we looked at what was in the pizzas, and we thought, tomato. And so I started to look at what tomato is. Tomato is one of the most significant producers of free glutamate that you can have in your diet. It doesn't even have to be processed. It does not even have to be processed. Okay? Fresh tomatoes. Yeah? We then took that out of his diet. And so tomatoes were gone. Then we thought, I'll buy some grapes that are kind of healthy. And he ate a whole bag while I wasn't watching. He was fixing himself. Because we were taking all his stuff out, weren't we? And he was fixing himself, and he ate a whole bag of grapes, and within 10 minutes, we knew he'd eaten a whole bag of grapes because he was punching the walls and punching us. And that lasted for 3 days. It's the sugar in the grapes. Okay? So then we knew that the excess sugar that was in there was causing a problem. And then we found he was fixing on tea. Give me more tea. The caffeine was doing it. So we took out all the caffeine, we took out all the sugar. And by the way, it wasn't as simple as this. We were looking at our records and seeing if it had similar consequences from having these things. So we weren't just saying, take that out, take that out, take that out. We were looking at the journal and going back through the journal, because, you know, Mark's specialists were saying, you can't just knee-jerk like that. It might be something else. And we showed them the journal and said, you know, you tell me anything more scientific than this. So we were able to relate similar incidents with similar food or environmental circumstances, and by and large remove other possibilities from the causes of these things. And I would again say, we know we're not absolutely right in all these things. We know we have made some mistakes in some of these things. And maybe the milk thing may not be as serious as we thought it was. We may have found that some of these things are less serious if you remove what we were talking about before. The psychotherapy thing becomes more successful. So he's less susceptible to blowing his top because he's more in control of his psychology. Okay? So we're doing these things, we're taking out all these things out of his diet, and it just becomes an endless list. If someone says what you have to take out, we now say, well, let me tell you what we can give him. And if you're interested, guys, I can tell you that in 1 minute. It's simple. His food can be listed in less than a minute. And we make all of his food out of those few ingredients. Fresh vegetables, but not all. Okay? And fresh, not processed. Fresh frozen, usually okay, provided it's been taken out the ground and frozen immediately, and then kept like that. But some not so. Some vegetables contain certain chemicals more than others. Onions, for example, cannot eat onions. Onions are full of the stuff. Okay, some onions not, some are, so we have to be careful. So vegetables. Fresh fruit, but not all fresh fruit. You'll understand when I say take the citrus fruits away. Don't give him oranges or lemons or limes or those things. They're really full of the stuff. Bananas, yeah, big glutamate producer. So no bananas.
Yes.
Apples and pears, generally okay. Generally okay. And actually we use apples and pears in many ways. If we're baking for him, apples and pears are what makes up the liquid in the compound that we're making. So we don't use anything, we don't even use water or milk. We could use water, but we don't use milk or other things that would make it into something that you can bake with. So apples and pears are a very important part of that. So we simply puree those things. We blend them, and then they become the liquid that blends in with, say, flour. Now flour, rice flour, and only pure rice flour. Can't even have corn flour, right? Can you believe that? Can't have corn flour. Can't have anything that's made or is based on flowers, floral things. So if people say give him a floral tea, herbal tea made out of flowers to calm his nerves, drives him up the wall, makes him worse. So the only tea happens to be that we've discovered so far is rhubarb. Okay, so red bush to some people. So he has rhubarb tea and he has water, and that's all he drinks. So apples and pears, rhubarb tea, water. Potatoes that are peeled are the most brilliant substance known to mankind. He eats them like they are going out of fashion, but they don't poison him. He loves potatoes, and we make every kind of potato you imagine. Eggs are great. Fresh eggs, just great. It's a pity we can't give him eggs all day long. You'd cause another problem with too many eggs. But yeah, eggs, apples and pears, potatoes, fresh peppers, red, green, orange peppers, great for adding a bit of flavour. And some herbs, so some mixed herbs and some fresh things that we can grind are really good to give it some taste. You want to see some of our recipes. They're just brilliant.
Clearly you've got...
But, we've discovered, we give him fresh chicken as long as it's fresh, organic chicken. And we're careful about how much of that. We give him fresh salmon that's, Scottish lochs and all those things.
Sounds an expensive business.
It can be an expensive business, but as you get used to it, it becomes easier. But we've kept him down to those things for now 18 months. Pretty well close on 18 months. I believe what we've done is we have detoxed his intestines, which I think was one of his physiological problems. I think he has physiological weaknesses that contribute to the intolerance, the severe intolerance, the critical intolerance he has to glutamate. So if we can fix or repair some of the physiological difficulties, say an intestinal problem, then he may be able to tolerate some more of these things. And that's where we hope we're going to go. So his intestines will work better.
One of the reported conditions associated with celiac disease is neurological impact. And I'm guessing, just strictly guessing, you have the journal, so you could probably determine it with a lot greater accuracy. But if there are some correlations between, flour-based cookies or whatever that entered his diet and then manifested in these behaviors, certainly you should be able to, I would think, correlate those incidences and make some good decisions for his diet.
Well, we've done that.
Obviously you've paid a lot of attention to it, and I certainly applaud your effort and your dedication, certainly. Amazing dedication.
Right. I want to interject something here, which might be ignored by or not noticed by a lot of people. But you know, people pass around or flip around too often about we're all here for a purpose and you know that type of thing. But I believe that the attention you're paying to your son's condition and whatnot, I believe you're going to make some fabulous breakthroughs.
Always
I really do. And I think I think in the end you're going to help a lot of people. And I applaud you and your wife for the dedication you have to learning his problem.
Let me make a small comment on what you've said. I believe that we are all here for a reason, and each of us has a reason which is more to do with our own spirits than to do with other people. I believe that my teacher is my son. And I think my wife has understood that too now. And I would say to all people who struggle with a loved one dealing with conditions like this, and I know